Hello, everybody. Welcome. How's everybody doing out there? Happy Tuesday. It's a Music Alliance. We are live. It's Janine. Happy to see you guys. It is Patrick Pulsar Trout's night. He's talking about his series, which is How the F to Get. So tonight, the third part of his series is How the F to Make Money, right? Making money. Everyone likes that, making money. So just to let you guys know, I'm always happy to be here, but I'm always happy that I am also a working musician and I'm in tech right now. So I'm going to probably be running out, getting my microphone on, all that fun stuff. I'll see if I can give you some like background of all the crazy that's going on and stuff like that. But tonight is about Patrick and all of the goodies that he's going to share with us so that you all get familiar with how to book a venue and how to get paid. So, Patrick, what are you going to share with us?
Everyone. Hi, Janine. First off, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you to Janine and to the entire Music Alliance team for allowing me the opportunity to participate in this ongoing series. I've really enjoyed it, and I really enjoy getting the chance to meet and discuss with fellow artists and musicians and fellow event producers the realities of navigating the business now, but also providing encouragement and also insight. And the insight is definitely a two-way street in the sense that I can provide insight from my angle, but also the questions that were asked really do a lot to really open my eyes to just the different challenges that artists are facing and ways to take those things head on. Thank you to everyone who's choosing to participate because you're a massive part of this and we wouldn't be able to do it without you. So, if you've been tuning in the last 3 months, we've been doing a series called How the F. And I decided to focus on the three main questions that people have asked me, which are how the F do I get booked? How the F do I promote a show once I've got a show? And finally, the $1 million question, how the F do I get paid? Now, this is a lot of times, this is actually the first question I'm asked, but I purposely saved it for last because the first couple of questions really had to be answered first, in the sense of figuring out how to get someone to say yes to booking you in the first place, and then how to proceed once that answer has come through to make sure that you aren't just getting a yes one time. When it comes to getting paid, though, there's a lot of different answers to that question. And it really depends on your individual situation and where you are at in terms of your career, which of those answers makes the most sense for you. So, the first question you have to ask, step zero, before anything else, when you're looking at how to get paid for shows, is there's a few questions you have to be able to ask yourself and answer correctly before you even pursue that. The first question being, are you still developing as an artist to the point where you're going to be reliant on the existing in-house crowd at a particular club or venue, or are you in a position where you're going to be bringing the crowd to that place? This is a very critical question because it's the first thing that most venues are going to ask either directly or to themselves when you approach them wanting to play a show is, okay, are am I going to be reliant entirely on the existing walk-in crowd or the existing regulars crowd at this club in order to justify the cost of the night? In which case, if all the band is bringing to the table is simply that they make music, is it a situation where they make really great music that's going to keep people existing there and staying there? Or is it a situation where it might turn off my regulars or it might turn off the established crowd to the point where they might take off or leave? This is something that talking to venues on the ground, I hear a lot, which is they want to try things that are different. They want to give people opportunities. But the problem is, if they have an established crowd that's looking for one specific thing, and you come in and what you're offering is something radically different, or if your live show isn't there and it's abrasive or rough, or if things just aren't connecting the way they're supposed to, is that going to affect their bottom line because their regulars say, oh, you know what, it's an off night, we'll come back another time? Because I've actively seen that happen in real time, unfortunately, with some events where an artist will go on, and it's not even necessarily that they're not a good artist, it's just that they don't fit what that established in-house crowd wants. And because they don't have a crowd of their own, suddenly they find themselves playing to a half empty or even completely empty room, and the venue finds themselves saying, we just lost a bunch of revenue walking out the door, so why should we bring this artist back? So you really have to get out ahead of that first. Now, if it's a situation where you're new or you don't necessarily have much of a draw of your own yet, that does not necessarily mean you can't get paid for performing. It just means that you may have to go about it a different way. Now, usually, most of the time when an artist is negotiating a deal with a club or a venue or an individual promoter, there's really three ways to go about it. And there's three ways that most venues will do it. The first, and this is arguably the most difficult thing to obtain as an artist, especially a new one, because it puts pretty much all of the risk on the side of the venue, is what's called a guarantee. A guarantee is literally just that. It is a guarantee that you are going to get paid a specific amount of money for performing, regardless of how that show performs. So let's say I book an artist with a guarantee of $500. If 100 people show up on a $10 ticket, they get that $500. But if two people show up, they still get that $500 because it is guaranteed money. Now, this is hands down the most difficult type of deal for an artist to get if they are new or unsigned or without representation, because most venues see that as a massive risk. Now, if you have a track record of drawing a certain amount of people on average, or if the venue itself has a built-in crowd that they know for a fact or they can judge will be receptive to what you were playing. So, for example, let's say you've got a barbecue restaurant that budgets $300 a night for live performers, and you happen to play bluegrass and you can do three 45-minute sets. And you tell them, hey, we need a $300 guarantee. They're probably going to not give you nearly as much pushback on that as if you go to a bar and say, hey, we're an original band doing our own songs. We have a 30-minute set, but we need $500 to play. Their immediate thought is going to be, okay, if you need $500 to play, are you going to bring $500 worth of ticket sales? And are those people going to drink? Or are they going to gamble? Or are they going to buy food, depending on what kind of venue it is? And this also gets trickier if you're looking at an all ages venue where they're entirely dependent strictly on ticket sales and they don't have necessarily alcohol revenue or gaming revenue. At that point, then it becomes even more challenging to get a guarantee. But that being said, there it doesn't mean you shouldn't try to ask for a guarantee. It just means that you should manage your own expectations in terms of what you can ask for the first time out, especially. Now, a lot of venues will be upfront about what they aren't willing to provide. And that is something that you should really pay close attention to. One of the easiest ways for your email to either end up without a response or just getting deleted is if you're asking for things that the venue is very upfront about online that they do not do. If a venue says we do not do guarantees, and the first things out of your mouth in an email are we need $500 to play this place, you're going to get your email deleted almost instantaneously, not just because they're not willing to do it, but because they're going to be a little bit annoyed that you didn't read. Now, that being said, if a venue says they are willing to do guarantees, or if a venue says that it's a case by case basis, then what you want to do is you want to approach them with as much ammunition as you possibly can to justify why you should be getting paid what you're being paid. One great way to do that is to make sure that you're tracking as much data as possible when it comes to playing your shows. When you play a show at any venue, you should be able the next day to know how many people showed up, how many people showed up specifically to see you, and if there was a ticket price, how much they paid to get in, and what the overall gross for your crowd was. That is the easiest way and the easiest metric to use to get a venue to say yes to a guarantee. There was this weird point in time for the last couple of years where a lot of promoters were simply trying to rely on social media metrics in terms of determining whether or not they wanted to book an artist. I talked to quite a few promoters in other markets who said that if a band has under a certain amount of streams on Spotify a month, they won't even consider them. Or if they're under a certain amount of followers on social media, they won't even consider them. I personally think that is a very flawed system for doing it because the fact of the matter is a lot of those statistics and data can be bought and paid for. The amount of artists I get who reach out to me where they have 1 million streams on one song and 10,000 streams on all their others, it's a massive red flag. or they have 100,000 followers on Instagram, but then all of their posts have maybe 100 likes and 2 comments. At a certain point, like they say, you ain't got to lie to kick it. I would much rather get offered an artist who maybe averages a few thousand streams a month, or maybe they just don't do Spotify because they don't like what Spotify's currently doing. And so their music's available on Bandcamp or Apple Music, but the quality is there. And one thing that I always recommend bands do, not just for the purpose of getting better deals, but also, quite frankly, to sharpen your own live show, is when you play live, make sure that there's somebody recording, even if it's just on an iPhone. iPhones have better video and camera quality now than a lot of professional digital cameras did even 10 years ago. And you can get a good quality recording that you can then go to venues and clubs with and say, hey, this is what our crowd actually looks like. Here we put 100 people in this bar. They're all singing, they're all dancing, they all have drinks in their hand, they all have food at their tables. These are the sort of things that a promoter or a venue will look at and go, hell yes, I want these guys in my room. Now, one thing that you also have to bear in mind when you're asking for guarantees is the math has to math. A lot of times people make the assumption, I run into this a lot with booking agents, where they'll make the assumption that the club is making money in other ways. They'll be looking at it as, okay, you're making your money at the bar, so if we get most of, if not all of the door, that's a reasonable request. When the truth of the matter is that doesn't factor in rent, that doesn't factor in labor, that doesn't factor in electricity or food costs or liquor costs or any of those things, security costs, all of that, to where those all have to be factored in. Me personally, as a promoter, my usual formula for determining a guarantee, if someone asks for one, I take the number of people that I think would show up to the show, I cut that number in half, and then I multiply it by the cost of the ticket. And if that number is higher than the amount, if that number is lower than the amount that they're asking for, then I might look at it. But if they're wanting, say, $5,000, and I'm looking at the fact that the show will probably do about $5,000 worth of business, then they're going to get an offer for 2,000 or 2,500. And if they pass on it, I'm okay with moving on. Because keep in mind that the majority of venues are not nonprofits. They're not community centers. They're not places where they're strictly focused on the art. Most live music venues are for profit. They're there to make money. And in order to exist and to sustain, they have to focus on liquor and alcohol sales and ticket sales and food and beverage. And they have to focus on a lot of things other than just simply your band being good. So, with that said, I want to talk about some of the other deals that a lot of times bands will be offered. One that comes up a lot is what's known as a door deal. A door deal is where the venue agrees to pay a certain percentage of the gross of ticket sales, or in some cases, a percentage of food and beverage sales to the artist for their performance. Now, this almost is a role reversal of the guarantee situation. This puts, in some cases, almost all of the risk on the artists themselves. Because the thing with a door deal is, as an artist, if you accept a door deal, you are accepting that with the understanding that 80% of nothing is still nothing. And you are, in a lot of cases, you are going to be largely dependent on the venue's in-house marketing, their in-house production, and their in-house street team to really let people know about the show. And one of the biggest mistakes I see artists make is they accept a door deal from a venue and then they move on operating under the assumption that they can set it and forget it and that the venue is going to take care of the rest in terms of the marketing and the production and everything else and finding good openers and making sure there's solid word of mouth. And the challenge with that is there are some venues where if they know that they don't have to pay a guarantee and they know it's just a percentage, it takes away the sense of urgency on their part to make sure they're doing what they need to do to make the night a success. And I've seen that play out in real time, unfortunately, where an artist will agree to a door deal and then suddenly they get to the venue day of and there aren't any posters up for the show or there's no local openers attached. And basically the venue saw it as, well, you agreed to play for whatever happened, so we didn't have to really stress about doing this extra stuff. When the truth is, those things that they didn't do are the floor. That's the bare minimum. You need to still market a show. You still need to make sure that the production is on point. You need to make sure you have security that are level headed and that there's enough of them for the kind of show it is. Those factors also have to come into place. Now, there's two types of door deals. There's what's called a gross and a net. A gross door deal is where you are getting paid from what's called dollar one. That means that if a show, for example, grosses $1,000 and your deal is for 70% of the gross, then your payout would be 70% of 1,000, which is $700. However, what's a lot more common is what's called a net deal. And a net deal is much more challenging because you're only getting a percentage after the house has covered what's commonly known as the house nut, which is their in-house expenses for, say, security, for box office, for advertising, for other labor, for production and whatnot. So let's say you agree to a 70-30 door deal on a net deal and the show grosses $1,000, but you have 500 in expenses. You're not getting paid 70% of 1,000, you're getting paid 70% of 500. And this is something that I see a lot of bands really trip themselves up with because they don't understand the difference between a gross deal and a net deal. And they end up agreeing to something that they really probably should not have. Now, net deals put the burden equal. Net deals are probably, I would argue, one of the definitely it's a little more fair than a straight gross deal for the promoter, and it's definitely more quote unquote fair for the venue or the promoter than a straight guarantee. I usually try to bridge the gap with my events by doing what I call a versus deal. A versus deal is a hybridization of a guarantee and a door deal. You're coming in with a lower guarantee than you maybe would have asked for on the front end, but you're also saying if the show performs well or hits a certain rate, then we're also going to provide this extra money. Or in a lot of cases, or in the case of a versus deal, it's let's say I offer your band $500 or 70% of the door, whichever's higher. Then that would mean on $1,000 gross, you'd be walking with seven, which would be the 500 guaranteed plus a $200 bonus because of the way the show did. But if the show does 20 people, you're still getting that guaranteed 500. You're not running the risk of not getting anything. And I find that those deals tend to be the most beneficial for both the club and also in a lot of cases for the artist, because especially if the artist is in a position to draw better than is anticipated for the market, in a lot of cases, you'll end up walking with more money than you even would have felt comfortable asking for in the first place. I had an artist about 10 years ago, this grindcore band called Melt Banana from Japan, and they played a show for me, and I had initially offered $1,000 versus 60% of the door. I did that figuring this is probably 120-ish person night on a $15 ticket. The show ended up doing over 300 people, and I ended up paying the band a little over 2 grand. And when I handed them the money, they were shocked. They were like, no, this is way too much. And I said, nope, look at the deal. It's right there in black and white. You earned this. This is your money. And their immediate reaction was, cool, we're coming back. So a lot of the time, it really does come down to finding what deal makes the most sense, not just for you, but also for the place you're negotiating with. And there are ways to do that are constructive and beneficial. One thing that, and I've said this in the last two sessions we've had, but one thing that I always emphasize is if you're thinking about playing a venue, go to that venue first as a fan. Buy a drink, buy a ticket, buy merch from the band that's playing, and really pay attention to how you're treated as a guest as opposed to another artist or someone else in their inbox. But also, it tells you what kind of experience your fans and your friends are going to have when they go there. If you go to a club that you want to play at and the bartenders are rude or the security is heavy-handed or the production is not on par, do you really want to play there? Do you really want to ask your friends to give up a Friday or Saturday where they could be going to the movies or doing stuff with their family and coming to your show instead if they're not going to have a good time? Do you want to ask your bandmates to give up a day of work at their day job to play a show that might or might not be worth the time? Of course not. So it's really important that you do that level of vetting first. You can certainly ask and talk to other artists and ask what they think and ask if they've had good experiences or bad experiences. But bear in mind that a lot of the times those are subjective. If you ask two different artists about the same club who've played for two different promoters, or one played on a Saturday and one played on a Wednesday, you might get two entirely different answers. So it's really important to do that vetting for yourself. Now, one thing that does get brought up a lot when I discuss how bands get paid is the concept of what's known commonly as pay to play. Now, pay to play is a practice that still exists and has existed for a very long time. And I'm here to tell you, pardon my language, it is bullshit and it does not work. And I'm going to get into the reasons as to why it doesn't work, not first from the artist perspective, but also from the promoter and venue perspective. Now, the thing with pay to play is it basically works like this. Let's say you have a band that wants to open at the Whiskey A Go Go in LA for a larger artist, like, say, Tiffany from the 80s. She's doing a revival show, and you've got a really cool new wave band, and you're thinking this would be a great crowd for us to play to. We really want to play this show. The promoter in that case is going to come back and they're going to say, okay, you want to play? Fine. We'll give you a 30-minute set. You have to use our equipment. You can't use your own stuff. You have to pay to park because we don't own the parking lot. And on top of that, here's a stack of 40, $25 tickets, total value of which is $1,000. When I hand you these tickets, they are as good as cash. And the day of the show, before you go on stage, I need $1,000 put in my hand. I don't care if you sell the tickets to make your money back. I don't care if you give them away. But either way, I need this money in hand or you do not play. And this practice, beyond the fact that even just when I say it out loud, it sounds probably extremely predatory to you. Here's the biggest challenge with pay to play as an artist. First off, there's so many things going on any given weekend in most cities that trying to sell 40, $25 tickets in a middle of a recession is going to be a really arduous task. And it's not even just a matter of getting people to agree to pay for them. You still have to deliver the tickets. You still have to make sure that people get them the day of. There's all these different things that cost money, but more importantly, they cost you your time. If you're spending the afternoon running around the city trying to hustle tickets instead of rehearsing, instead of building your network by going to events, instead of building your network by doing things online, you're really not accomplishing anything for yourself. You're essentially just doing the promoter's job for them. And the issue with this too is that if someone's buying a ticket, pay to play ticket, most of the time, the individuals who are selling these tickets, they're not even actively trying to promote the overall show. They're strictly promoting themselves. When I was working in LA at the Viper Room, I got a lot of invites to pay to play shows at the Whiskey and other places. And one of the massive challenges that I saw with that was that a lot of the times when I got the flyer for a show, it wouldn't even have the full lineup. It would just be, hey, my band plays at 8:45 p.m. at the Whiskey. Tickets are $20, be there. And my immediate reaction was, who else is playing? What else is the show? I'm not going to pay $20 to watch one band play for 30 minutes who might or might not even be good. Because the other thing about pay to play is that the venues that do pay to play, they don't care if you're good or not. They don't care if you know how to play your instruments. They don't care if you're going to put on a good show. They don't even care if you drive business out at the door because they already got their money, is the mentality. They're like, even if your friends show up, don't show up at all, or they show up by one drink and leave, or they hang outside, they don't care because their attitude is we already got the ticket money. The problem with that is that in the long term, it really doesn't even work for the venue because if you've got a quote unquote sold out pay to play show with 400 tickets sold, but there's never more than 40 or 50 people in the bar at a time because they're only coming to see their friends play, in the time that you're on stage, they might show up 5 minutes before you go on and they're going to leave the second you're done. They might buy a drink if there isn't too long of a line. So now the venue is losing beverage revenue and losing ancillary revenue because they were too focused on picking up quarters. Meanwhile, they're stepping over dollars. And in the long term, it really doesn't work. And the other thing that it does is it burns bands out. If you're having to try to sell tickets every month just to play a show, or if you fall into that trap, it becomes so easy for your fans to eventually develop a level of fatigue. Most bands, even without pay to play, there's about a 6 month to 1 year honeymoon period where you can get your family to show up, you can get a lot of your friends or your coworkers to show up. But at about the 1 year mark, you have to start getting people to show up to your shows that aren't just people in your immediate circle. Now, that doesn't mean they can't be people you know or associate with. They could be people in other bands. They could be people in the community and the scene who discovered you. They can even be just people who just found your band randomly and like it. But if you're relying entirely on your friends and your family, they're going to be the first people to burn out on having to buy $20 tickets every 30 days to see you play for 30 minutes. They're going to be the first ones to say, you know what, man, I'll catch you on the next one. And the problem is, next month becomes next quarter, which becomes next year. And I see a lot of bands, unfortunately, fall into this trap where they have their first show, they do a pay to play show, 50 of their friends show up, and then 3 months later, they do another one and 35 show up. And then by the end of the year, they're having to come out of pocket to buy the tickets because they can't get anyone to buy them. And again, if you're having to come out of pocket every time you play a show, at a certain point, unless you've got an infinite amount of capital to work with, or you can make it back in other ways, on a long enough timeline, the survival rate drops to zero. And most bands realistically aren't democracies. There's usually one or two people who are not only on the creative side, but they're in a lot of cases financing the band. That's just realistically the way most bands operate. Every band I've ever been in, it was basically socialism. It was from each according to his ability to each according to his need. So there might be a year where I paid most of the bills. There might have been a year where the singer paid most of the bills. It just depended on who had the ability to make things sustain. So it is so easy to burn yourself out that way. And and so for that reason, I really recommend that bands not do pay to play. Even if you feel like you quote unquote don't have a choice because of the way your market is set up, you actually do. And that brings me to the next topic I'm going to talk about in terms of ways to get paid. Now, this is the method that is by far the most labor intensive on the artist side, but it has the potential to be the most rewarding. And that's doing what's called a four wall. Now, a four wall is basically where you're essentially serving as the de facto promoter. Instead of making a deal with a promoter and them agreeing to pay you a percentage or you agreeing to sell tickets, you basically go full Thanos and say, fine, I'll do it myself. So, for example, let's say you've got a venue that you reach out to and you want to play there, and they say, we really don't work with artists we haven't worked with yet. So, if you want to use the room, it's a $500 rental fee. Now, a lot of people look at that and they think that's pay to play. I don't want to do that. However, depending on the venue, and I emphasize that in all caps, depending on the venue, it might make sense to try it. It depends on whether the venue has the production that you need. It depends a lot on whether they have the staffing that you need. If a venue is going to charge you a certain amount of money and you know that they're going to have a sound guy who's competent and they're going to have security that's level headed and you know they're going to have a box office rep and that you're going to be able to get straight answers as to what the gross is, or especially if they're willing to let you handle your own ticketing, then you're in a position of strength to really build a show the way you want. $500 might sound like a lot of money being asked by one band to come up with. However, if you can put together a lineup of like-minded artists or a showcase of some sort where you've got enough people on board where that burden has been split between, let's say, 3 or 4 different acts, it puts you in a position to say, all right, guys, we know that we have to hit this amount of money for any of us to make money. However, what we aren't in a position is where we're contractually obligated to sell X amount of tickets and starting off in the red right off the bat. And if we work together and we build this correctly, we can walk with more money than any venue or promoter would offer us on the front end. This is something I used to utilize a lot when I was touring in bands back in between 2007 and 2013. We ran into an issue in a lot of towns where venues just did not want to book an unsigned touring band. They just looked at it as it's going to be a waste of our time and our energy. And I could understand the apprehension. So what I would do is I would make an offer and I would say, how about I do this? If your overhead is $500, I will guarantee you that $500 worth of business is going to come in. Let me build the lineup, ensure that I have these specific needs, whether it's a sound person or PA with specific equipment, basically everything that I need to put on the show properly. I will provide the lineup. I will provide the marketing materials, and I will essentially take the risk and the stress off of you. There are more and more venues now that are not only willing to do this, but in a lot of cases are doing this out of necessity because post COVID, small venues are really struggling. A lot of them can't afford to hire an in-house promoter or an in-house talent buyer. In a lot of cases, and this goes for even venues up towards of 1,000 cap, they don't have a booking manager at all. A lot of times they're expecting the bar manager to also manage the calendar, or they're expecting the front of house sound person to also manage the calendar. And so any opportunity that they have to delegate and outsource some of this responsibility, they are usually going to take, especially if they know that basic needs are being covered. Now, the thing with four walling an event is you have to know for a fact that you're going to be able to meet the financial obligation before you go in. That is not something where you have a margin for error, because the problem is if you book a show and then you realize the night of you can't afford to pay for it, that is going to dramatically affect your ability not only to work with them again, but to work with anybody again, because this is a very small industry and everybody talks. Even if they don't like each other, they talk. And it is very easy for the game of telephone to take over, and suddenly you falling a few hundred short on a four wall deal evolves into, oh, these guys purposely booked a show that they knew wasn't going to make money, and then they tried to weasel out of paying me. And it's so easy for these things to snowball in a negative fashion. So in order to make a four wall work, the first thing you have to do is you have to look at the hard cost of doing the show and determine whether or not you can hit it. And that same formula that I was telling you about, where I determine whether or not I'm going to book a show by taking the number of people who would show up and dividing it, you can absolutely use that same formula for determining whether a four wall makes sense. Let's say you've got a venue that's on the more expensive side. Let's say it's going to cost $1,000 to do the show, but that includes your sound, your security, all of that, all the bells and whistles, and all you have to focus on is the advertising and paying the bands out from whatever comes in. Then what you have to do is say, okay, if we're doing a $20 ticket and on paper we need 50 people to break even, we also need to determine how much money we each need to make as artists to make sure that we're happy with the end result. You add that number on top. Then you take the number of people you think would show up, and again, you cut it in half. If you think you can hit that number with that amount of people showing up, then I would say it's worth trying. If not, then honestly, I wouldn't take the chance. And the thing is, there are a lot of artists who spend months or even years playing shows for other people before they do a four wall of their own. And I actually think that's wise, because one of the things about playing for other promoters and playing for venues where they're taking the risk or where you're playing for door deals and whatnot is it really does a lot to manage your own expectations as to what venues can and can't do, and also what you can or can't do as an artist. Because realistically, the primary focus is always going to be the art itself. Your main focus is always going to be putting on the best show you possibly can and writing the best songs you can. So the marketing side and the business side is realistically going to come second or third. But knowing yourself well enough to know if it makes sense to take that kind of jump is critical once you get to this level. So, with all of that being said, it looks like there's already a bunch of action going on in the chat, which is awesome. Let's see here. I'm advising an act with a high energy comic book inspired theatrical rock show. I think Alice Cooper turned up. That sounds really freaking cool. That sounds awesome. And that sounds like something that venues would be excited about, because really what people are really looking for right now, especially post COVID, is things to be events, to be parties, to be fun. Simply saying, hey, we have some bands playing just does not move the needle anymore the way it used to. I tell bands and venues and promoters all the time, your competition isn't each other. Your competition is Netflix. It's people staying home. We're considering a mini residency, a couple of in-venue rehearsal days followed by several consecutive shows to refine cues and finalize our pack list. What has been your experience with mini residencies like this, and which venue types would you target? That is a great question. So I actually just recently had a mini residency with a brand new all women Beatles tribute that I'm working with. And what I found was interesting. The first couple of dates did really well. We did a Friday and Saturday back to back. And because they were already getting a good amount of buzz online, and because the third date had opened up, I decided to add a third date the next following Saturday. The first two dates did solid numbers. The third date did about the same numbers, except in terms of turnout, but I had to comp the show a lot heavier than I had to do the first two. And I think it was simply because I think three shows for an artist that was still fairly new was essentially one too many. I think that it gave people maybe the mistaken impression that I can see this next week or I can see it next month. Now, the thing with something like what you're talking about, where it's extremely theatrical and it's bringing in an element outside of simply rock fans in the sense that you're also, because of the inspirations, potentially bringing in the comic book community. I think that might lend itself better to having consecutive shows because you're not just relying on one particular crowd of people. You're relying on multiple avenues in the sense of you're not just going after rock fans, you're also going after comic book fans. And a lot of them have different schedules. And I think giving people the freedom to pick what day they want to go to does make a lot of sense. As far as venue types, I would start first and foremost with your live show itself. Knowing the kind of live show you want to put on in terms of production and in terms of what you're going to need and also what you're going to want is really critical for this. Because the last thing you want to do is compromise the live show quality because you're just trying to make it fit in a specific space. At the same time, you also have to be cognizant of something that looks really cool in a small, intimate setting on a larger stage might not look the way you want it to look. And there's something to be said for having the ability to not only scale up, but also scale down in terms of your production. I've worked with artists where they might play a 150 cap dive bar in some markets, but they might play a 500 seat theater in another because of the way their draw is or the way their market history is in certain places. And what I have found is that usually what they will have is they will essentially have two versions of their production. They'll have a version that can fit within a certain amount of space, and then they'll have a version where there's no limits and they're able to do what they want, how they want. But they have both ready to go so that regardless of which venue they're having to do or what the situation is, they can make sure the show is still entertaining and they can still make sure that the show fits the room and matches up with the fans' expectations. So, in terms of what venues to target, I would say start first and foremost with your production in the sense of figuring out what you know you absolutely need and also making sure that the venue's expectations are managed and that they know exactly what they're signing up for. Because there's a lot of venues that unfortunately will say yes to something because it sounds cool on paper. And then the minute they realize the amount of extra effort that goes into making it, suddenly they're trying to push back on everything. And especially for an event like this, I would absolutely vet the venue first by going as a fan and making sure that what that they're picking up what you're putting down in terms of the guest experience. Let's see. Janine put the pitfalls and pluses of paying a booking agent or producer to book your act and when you might be ready for that. That is a really good point. I've heard a lot of people say, you know what, I really don't want to have to deal with promoters and venues. I would rather just hire an agent or a producer to do it for me. The challenge with this is that booking agents and event producers are really not looking to work with brand new artists. They're looking for artists that have already provided what's called proof of concept. They need data. They need to know that the work ethic is there. They need to know that the artist is going to be reliable, that they're going to show up to venues, that they're going to be respectful, that they're going to put on a good show, and that it's not going to affect their reputation because it is so easy to have your reputation as an agent or as a promoter get messed up because you book the wrong band in the wrong venue and they make a mess or they make a scene. Or on the flip side, you end up working with an agent who's really abrasive or who turns off people that already wanted to work with you. I've had friends in bands who got decent shows and then signed on with a booking agent and then within a year were back to booking themselves largely out of damage control because the person they hired managed to burn bridges for them. I would say that the point at which an artist is ready for it really depends on your genre. I know from talking to friends of mine that are agents right now, and keep in mind this is on the independent club level of the 200 to 500 cap world. Usually, what they're looking for is an artist that can not only sell out, that can basically fill a room not only in their market, but in theoretically 5 to 10 other markets, depending on the region they're in. So it's a lot more difficult. Now, if you can fill a market locally, consistently, you would certainly probably find people who would be interested in managing you or serving as your agent. The real question is if you're already doing that on your own and they can't do anything for you in other markets, do you really need someone like that? Or is it just another middleman? I would say that once you've gotten yourself to the point where you have a consistent draw in your local market and you have a track record of having played shows in other markets, and even if you aren't bringing a ton of people, bringing in a consistent smaller amount, or especially if you're able to do what I call show trades, where you find bands in other cities that you want to go to and you work out a deal with them where you set them up with a show in your town and they set you up in theirs, that really goes a long way towards building up the kind of data that an agent is going to want to look at before they consider taking you on. If I get reached out to by an artist who says we average 100 people in Vegas, but we also can draw 50 in Southern California, Utah, and Arizona because of our connections with other artists, that's someone I'm going to take a look at. That's someone I'm willing to take the extra time to pay attention to. Now, one thing also in terms of paying an agent also is knowing what to pay. A booking agent, usually the standard rate is 10% of whatever you're making. And again, big reason why agents aren't looking for new acts is it takes just as much effort to book $100 band as it does to book $1,000 one. And so it's very easy for a booking agent if they take on too many smaller acts to basically be working for essentially minimum wage or under it. Whereas if they know that you can command a certain amount per night and they're getting a commission based on that, then they can chalk that up and see if it makes sense for their workload, if it makes sense to take you on. Dynasty wrote, "Good evening. What do you feel is the best way for an upcoming independent conscious rap artist to promote themselves, gain more rapping and production experience, and gain revenue via live performances and social media? And it is your experience, is getting a business master's or a music business master's helpful in this industry? And would you recommend an internship or another route to gain experience and learn the business? Why or why not?" Those are some very good questions. First thing I'm going to tackle on is the issue of promoting yourself in the rap world. Hip hop is arguably right now, probably I would say one of the toughest genres to succeed in. Part of that has to do with while the music is mainstream, a lot of venues just flat out do not want to book hip hop, unfortunately. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, the reason is exactly what people think it is, and it's stupid. And one of my litmus tests for working with venues is if they tell me they don't want to book hip hop, I ask them why. And if they can't give me a decent answer, I don't do any business with them at all. That's something I can clock from a mile away. Now, that being said, it is difficult to promote in the rap world because, again, because of the lack of venues that are willing to take it on, unfortunately, it's opened itself up to a lot of people who, again, engage in predatorial practices like pay to play. There's more pay to play in the hip hop world than there's ever been in the rock world. Anytime I see a local hip hop showcase being advertised in Las Vegas, usually the way it works is this: they get an MC to pay $200 to do two songs. Or if they're willing to pay 300, maybe they get to do one extra one. And they sell this to you as a networking opportunity. But again, what you end up with is you have a bunch of people doing short sets, 15-minute sets, which means that you think it's hard to get someone to buy a $20 ticket to see you play for 30 minutes. Try getting them to see you well for 15. But even if you're able to sell them, you're probably coming in, watching their set, maybe buying a drink, and then leaving. And statistically, because hip hop crowds tend to drink less on average than rock crowds, with exceptions of clubs that offer bottle service, it is really hard to get venues to agree to do it without some sort of a pay to play element being involved. The other thing also is that An unfortunate side effect of the hip hop scene is that, especially post COVID, is that a lot of artists are very isolated. They essentially exist in the lab. The problem with that is they're not out and about engaging at shows, so they tend to see each other as competition. So, one thing I've also noticed with a lot of these pay to play hip hop shows is that you end up with this really weird vibe where it's like everyone's on the show together trying to make the show work, but they're also simultaneously not really wanting to engage with each other or wanting to support each other. So, I think the best way to get around that, especially as a conscious rap artist, which is a subgenre in and of itself, is to try to go to as many live shows in that genre as you can. And when people see that you're actively out and about, that really is the way to build your network organically because a lot of people try to make everything transactional. And at that level, yes, there's a certain amount of it being transactional, but a lot of it really is community based, especially with hip hop. There was an interesting article talking about how hip hop isn't in the top 40 for the first time in over 30 years. But when you look at the fine print on that, it's because a lot of the artists that used to be categorized as hip hop have either veered more towards R&B and pop, or in some cases they've even veered towards country. So there is still hip hop out there that is pure hip hop, but it's really more on the underground side. It's much more, it's not in the 2000 capacity Live Nation venues, it's in the 200 cap clubs. That's really where you're finding it. So those are the sort of places and those are the sort of networks that you can utilize and build up. And I think that, again, playing live as much as possible is important, especially in the hip hop world, because a lot of hip hop artists don't. So if you're able to play live more, that's really going to make you stand out. Regarding what you said about getting a business master's or a music business master's, now I will say this: I will never ever discourage someone from getting education. I will never discourage someone from any avenue of education or anything that's going to teach them more about the world. A lot of people, I'm part of a generation that was essentially beaten over the head with the idea that you had to go to college and you had to get a degree, regardless of what it was in. And if you didn't do that, you were never going to get anywhere in life. And a lot of people went to college not because they wanted to become a better citizen or become more learned or become more aware of the world and hear opinions different from their own and beliefs different from their own and use those to build their view of the world. They purely went for a transactional reason, which was to get a job. And I can honestly say that if the worst possible reason to go to college is so that you can get a job, I would say that the real reason to go to college and the reason to go for something like a master's in business is to make jobs. If you're going for a master's in something, you're not going to school simply to get a job. You're going to school so that you can create jobs for others. That's how empires are built. That's how businesses are built. So I would say that if you're really into the business side of the industry and that's where you see yourself wanting to put more of your focus in over time, then I think absolutely going to school for that would be an excellent choice. And also, the other thing is, there is nothing wrong with having a contingency plan in the sense of having a degree, having a trade, having something that you can rely on in the lean years during recessions, during times when people aren't going out as much, during times when people aren't necessarily seeking out new music as much. There is nothing wrong with having that sort of backup to make sure that no matter what, you have a career of some sort. I definitely don't recommend putting yourself in debt to do it. There's no reason to put yourself in six figures of debt to get a 40,000 a year job. But what you're talking about doing is not a 40,000 a year job. It's something that you do to build something bigger. So I think for that reason, I think it would make sense. I would say that you definitely want to do your homework on where to get those sort of degrees from. There's a lot of there are a lot of people now, and I see this with a lot of the for-profit schools like Full Sail and others, where they're trying to get people to pay 30 to 60 grand to get a live event bookings degree or a live event management certificate. And those to me are a waste of time. I would not do something like that. If it's something like an actual master's in business or a master's in business with a focus on things like the arts, that I think is absolutely worth pursuing. We've got about 8 minutes left in the course, and I definitely want to keep, yeah, Berkeley is 60K a year. And Music Alliance is 240 a year, which gives you 59,000 for your recording studio setup. That is a great way to put it. Music Alliance, and a big reason why I love participating in these courses, Music Alliance, I wish this had been around 20 years ago when I was in college in bands and when I was first getting started as a promoter, because it is such a valuable resource of information. And you're getting information from people who've not only have studied, but have actually actively lived it. People who've been boots on the ground, whether it's as an artist or as a producer or in marketing or in management. You're getting a real value in terms of education that, again, you'd be looking at high five figures to get just about anywhere else. And then one thing I wanted to also mention on getting paid with residencies. One thing that you can do with residencies that is very valuable, a lot of residencies make the mistake of just having the headliner and that's it. But if you can cycle in one or even two openers each week, that keeps the lineups a little bit fresh. And the other thing that it also does is while it's a residency for you, it's a one-off shot for them. So they're going to put everything they have into pushing that show. So it really helps in terms of getting new faces out every week. Because there are some people, if they're a diehard fan, will come out to see you every week, but those people are going to be few and far between. What you really need is to be getting out in front of new people every week, and having solid openers each week really goes a long way in making that happen. Let's see. Mark wrote, agreed 1,000%. I graduated with a BS in accounting in 2020. That's awesome, by the way. And my ultimate goal is to make my degree slash money make itself no matter what path I chose to go. Music is my gift and purpose, though. Honestly, that's one of the best degrees you can have is accounting. That is going to put you in a real position of strength when you're negotiating deals for yourself, and also to make sure that you know exactly what's going into it and knowing that you're not going to be taken advantage of. I remember at one point talking to a mentor of mine and saying that I was thinking about going back to school either for economics or accounting. And he said, "Why would you pick economics?" And I said, "It's just something I'm personally interested in." And he said, "I'm not telling you not to take courses in it, and I'm certainly not saying you shouldn't take courses in things that you find intellectually compelling, but an accounting degree will put you in a position where you can actually put that education into practice." And for that reason, I think accounting is really valuable. And especially accounting is an industry that's changing dramatically. A former mentor of mine is heavily involved in blockchain, and I'll fully admit that crypto is not something I really know a whole lot about and don't have a ton of interest in. But hearing him speak about it was interesting in the sense of he wasn't talking about crypto as a speculative asset. He was talking about the blockchain technology in terms of accounting purposes because of the fact that it leaves a constant digital trail. And that was something that I looked at and was like, oh, that's actually really cool. But especially when you look at how tech centric a lot of things are changing in the music world right now, between things like AI and other elements and a lot of the ethical issues that are coming in with that. And also when you look at the amount of scrutiny that deals are being put under and the companies that put on events are being put under, all of the controversies surrounding Live Nation and Ticketmaster being a perfect example of that. Having a background in accounting really goes a long way, I think, in terms of really knowing what you're up against and puts you in a position of strength to make much better decisions. Were there any other questions that people had, or did anyone from the Music Alliance team want to chime in on anything?
Not that I can see.
Oh, can we see
Yeah,
your full head? Yep. Yep.
Janine is offline, so I'm taking over for the end. Hi,
Awesome.
I'm G3. Okay, do you have anything you'd like to say to wrap up?
Sure. So I would say, in conclusion, just to go over the bullet points of what we discussed today, there are various ways of getting paid for playing shows. The biggest thing is making sure, first of all, that you are in a position to negotiate a deal and not have it be a one and done because you aren't able to deliver on what you're promising. But then once you've gotten to that point, looking at the different types of deals, we talked about guarantees, which again are the most beneficial for the artist, but they are the highest risk for promoters. But they are something that you can eventually get to. And the more data you have for the shows you've played, the easier it is to negotiate them. We also talked about
Wow.
door deals and the difference between a gross deal and a net deal and how to protect yourself in those cases. and making sure that the deal is advantageous for you and also isn't setting yourself up for a shortfall. And then we also talked about the caveats of pay to play and why 999 times out of 1,000 it does not make sense to do it.
No.
And then we finally touched on the subject of four walls, which I actually would argue that probably most artists should hit the guarantee part before they hit the four wall part. And the only reason why I say that is in a lot of cases, it's a lot of venues will push you to do a four wall instead of a guarantee before giving you a guarantee. But once you have the data and you can ask for a guarantee, it's really important to look at what those venues do once they've guaranteed you money. If a venue agrees to pay you a guaranteed amount, but then you don't see them putting the effort into marketing or you don't see them putting the effort into the production, that is a big, massive red flag.
Yeah.
But with four walls, it does put you in the driver's seat, but you still have to make sure there's gas in the tank. And
That's
the
how we
best
used
way
to
to do
it.
that is by building that network over time and just putting yourself in a position to negotiate the best deal possible. I know that, especially right now, things can be really discouraging. The biggest thing that I want people to take away from this each and every month is that you are not alone in this. There are a ton of people out there who really love this and really want to make it happen. And it's not just that they want to succeed, they want to see you succeed too, because we're in this together realistically. We're all trying to make the same thing happen right now, which is we're trying to provide joy to people at a time when there's not a lot of joy to be found. And we're trying to do it in a way where we can still provide for ours and take care of our families and take care of ourselves. And it doesn't need to be an adversarial dynamic. It doesn't have to be band versus band or band versus promoter or promoter versus promoter. We're in a position to all succeed together as long as we're willing to work together. But I really want to make sure that you guys know when you log off from this that it's not just, okay, I got some pointers and that's that. I'm going to put my email into the chat right now. And anyone who wants to reach out or has any questions about any follow-up questions or anything about these things, I'm happy to answer them anytime. After last month's, I had a couple of really great conversations with some artists who were seeking more advice on booking and was able to get some great insight from them also as to some pitfalls that I didn't even realize that artists were dealing with now, but that they had dealt with. So that information is super valuable. And also I really recommend that even if you don't necessarily, even if you're hyper focused on just the live music and touring aspect, if you have opportunities to tune into the other courses, whether it's production or recording or marketing, take the time to do it because all of these things feed into each other.
Yes. Absolutely.
And you have a real wealth of expertise and knowledge here. So with that being said, I want to thank G, I want to thank Janine, I want to thank everyone on the Music Alliance team for allowing me the opportunity to participate in this. And I want to really encourage all of you to stay the course and just remember that working smart is just as important as working hard, but y'all are some of the hardest working people I know, and we can make it happen together.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for your time today, Patrick. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the other streams that are coming up this week, tomorrow, Wednesday, is Keys, talking about social media automation strategies for artists to increase engagement and revenue. Whoopee. And then on Thursday, Mello is here to talk about contracts. And also I'm supposed to promote the November 24th second half of our Song Sharks finalists live before a panel of judges to access music business readiness. So that's it for tonight, everybody. I hope you got as much out of this as I did. And I know I've been around for a while and I got a ton of stuff. So thank you again, Patrick. That was really cool, man. So based
Awesome. Thank
on
you
that,
so much for your
everybody,
time. Really appreciate it.
good night. Have a good one. And we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
See ya.